And we are live with another episode of the Keeg Chats. It's that show brought to you by the Keeg where we talk to awesome people. The Keeg Chats with awesome people. The awesome person today is writer slash artist Josh Blaylock. Josh, how's it going, man? Welcome to the
Great, man.
show.
Great. Thanks for the compliments. Makes me feel special.
Oh, did I call you awesome?
Yeah.
Is that how low the
Yeah.
bar is?
Yeah.
Awesome
Yeah.
is like that's good enough.
Yeah. That's just, that's good. Sorry, we just
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm happy to have you on this because first and foremost, I was just looking through your resume as one does, and you got a lot of GI Joe under your belt, which kind of ties in with what we're here to talk about.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. We're here to talk about The Disavowed, which is a new comic book that you have coming out with Devil's Due Studios, and with Massive Publishing. And do you want to tell me the premise of The Disavowed? Because I could say it, I could sum it up, but I'd rather, hear it from the source.
Yeah, it's the story of the United Five, the top secret task force from the 1980s, and their battle against the terrorist cult known as with esoteric powers known as Komodo.
Mm-hmm.
And how that leads into the future, told through the eyes of the child of one of these members, Matthew, and or as the marketing people easily sum it up, GI Joe meets the boys.
I mean, you have to have an easy way to just kind of
Yeah,
throw it out there. It's Mean Girls meets M. Night
yeah.
Shyamalan Signs.
I get to be like, oh well, it's this and this deconstruction and blah 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 blah, and then like, yeah, it's this.
Yeah. Do you feel like that sums it up the best though? GI Joe meets
Oh,
the boys.
and definitely in a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, I think it's like anything, it's like there's all kinds of nuances and differences, and it's not, um, but yeah, for sure. Like, but really, I mean, if you go to kind of like any deconstruction, like Watchmen or Invincible or even Hell the Tick, I mean, this is all, stuff that says, okay, you know how the archetypes are supposed to be, um, you know, and then from there you can like have fun.
Yeah. The thing that stood out to me, and I read a little bit of it at San Diego Comic Con when I was there, which I think I met you. I said hi in passing. I
Yeah.
read, I glimpsed through the comic. First thing that I read was the PSA, or not the PSA. It's like the more you know,
Oh yeah.
sort of covered in
Yeah, you don't.
blood story right
Yeah,
at the end
you
there.
jumped. Yeah, that's the first. Yeah, that. So now that is a satire, which we could, completely. We just that's just something we're gonna have fun with,
Mm-hmm.
because we're treating it not just like this is a story that takes you back to this action in the 80s into the present day. We're also treating it like this was an actual brand or like a property that existed, so with its own fandom. So
Mm-hmm.
now, besides just the story, we can sort of have fun with like little gags and references about stuff that happened back in the day that, you know, I can pick whether or not we actually go into it or really do put that in the story, or there's no reason we can't have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things is that back in the day, they did have public service announcements, um, being like curated by, the members of the United Five, which, but these guys have like seen some things and they may not be the best representatives to like send messages like of positivity to children.
Right. Yeah,
Really,
covered in
they just
blood.
there's traumatized kids in every single interaction.
Right. And it's funny because is it too far to assume that you grew up on 80s cartoons? Is it
Oh yeah.
is it fair to
Oh, of
assume?
course. Yeah. I mean, I'm late 40s. It's right there
Hmm.
for when it all happened. So eating a steady diet of eating, sleeping, and breathing, and playing with and making stories about,
Yeah.
talking
Uh,
about every 80s cartoon.
were you a big fan of GI Joe back then, or did you develop into a fan later?
Uh, Definitely was back then, but funny enough, though, I wasn't at first. I kind of like I I was. I mean, I always drew, but I really got into. I think it was like He-Man and other stuff. But for some reason, I loved Transformers. Like the first episode of Transformers that came on TV blew my mind. And then I kind of like just stayed. My cousin was obsessed with GI Joe stuff, and he had all of them. and I can't remember what happened, but one day I just decided like I did like it, and I something clicked, and I finally got it. And I started trading all my Transformers, my like beautiful, pristine G1 Transformers. I'd start trading for like beat up GI Joe guys missing like a weapon.
Yeah.
Like here, I'll give you Wheeljack for like those three dudes, and
Ye-
then from there I discovered the comic books,
Yeah.
which is really what I think sucked me in, because the comics were like you felt like you're getting this elevated, more adult, entertainment value
Mhm.
versus like watching the way, even as a kid, you're watching the cartoons and you're like, oh, all the Cobra guys escape. They parachute out of every plane and lasers never hit anybody. And you get the comic book and you're like 10 and you're like, oh my God, this is like so real.
Yeah. I I've never read the GI Joe comics. I was telling you this beforehand, and now it seems to me like, am I the odd one out that I didn't grow up or didn't read the GI Joe comics?
Not as a person in general, growing up, but as a comic book podcaster or interviewer, maybe.
Yeah, they. Oh, I'm.
Yeah,
Am I?
you're in the
Am
comic book world.
I'm sorry. First thing, I apologize. Also, I'm. I would say like I like GI Joe. I really do. I've seen. Is it bad? I've seen the movies, right? I've seen the cartoon. Two different things I know. But I feel like I'm more of a casual fan. Now, here's the question for you with the Disavowed. Obviously, I feel like people who like GI Joe comics with the parody slash satire twist are gonna like the Disavowed. Is it also good for casual fans?
Yeah, oh, 100% it's being written that way. And one thing that points to that is when we do our flashbacks, as you've seen, like we actually have laser guns.
Yeah,
There were never laser guns in the comic books.
yeah.
And except these lasers actually hit people and they just eviscerate, anything they come into contact with. So that it's kind of funny. It started as a desire to have that element in it, and it
Hmm.
ended up becoming a major plot point. So that over the last year and a half of developing all this, so yeah, like I made sure there's like a big money shot spread when you finally see like the opening battle, and
Mm.
we really like Carlos Padilla, the colorist, worked over Pop Mon's art to really get the laser effects just right. Like I was screen capping all kinds of old cartoons of all kinds of different shows from the 80s, seeing like what did they do to get those special like laser effects from like Sunbow animation and from anime back then, and he nailed it. So um anyway, sorry, I went on a tangent there.
No,
But
it's all right.
yeah, it's definitely like because not just like for the casual fan, I want
Mhm.
someone who is 19 years old to be able to read this, who maybe their dad's obsessed with it or something and they just never cared, whatever. But they know enough to get it and they've seen the movie, couple movies or whatever, read some comics. Like they're like, oh, when you hit the 80s part, there's just like a vibe.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, this shit's crazy, like and in the story, it really much embraces that. So one thing I'm doing with this is I'm not trying to bring like if this was, I guess an example would be like if this really was like GI Joe or some other 80s thing. I'm not trying to modernize those characters into the present day. I'm going the other way. I'm 100% owning it. Like these guys, no, these guys are like Reagan era like warriors, and they have a mission that they fully believe in that's honorable, and they're doing it. And some of them are truly our heroes. Some of them are like totally problematic and don't even realize it. And some
Right.
of them are like, and then in the modern day, thing like in real life, things seem a little more like less crazy or crazy in different ways, but like a little more sanitized or just dealt with differently. And when you hear these flashbacks, it's like, what happened back then? Like that sounds like all fucked up,
Yeah.
So they're yeah, I really so that means when I do the flashback stuff, I can have all kinds of references for the most hardcore fanboy or fangirl of those properties and do little Easter eggs that they'll get. But if the younger, newer audience reader is like just a vibe, and they're really getting the whole picture, like the whole holistic story that comes into the future.
I feel like you're coming at it from a really good way. So when it comes, again, this isn't like a frame by frame, retelling of GI Joe, not by any sorts. But when you're bringing in like the '80s with a refresh, a reboot with that kind of vibe, you do have to appeal to people who grew up in the '80s versus now, people who are 18 and people who are 80 years old, right?
Yeah. Like when you look at these characters, if you never saw them before, you're like, wait, this dude's just bare chested with tattoos on his chest and a big mustache running into battle with this crazy gun. Like that's ludicrous, you know?
Right.
But it's like it's not just Joe, it's like every 80s Schwarzenegger, Stallone,
Right.
Brian Bosworth VHS action movie from back then. So which I was raised on that stuff way before I should have been watching any of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's got that Carl Lewis and Arnold Schwarzenegger like meme energy there.
Yeah. I was about to say with Predator and everything, like when you're composing a team, everybody looks different. It's what I call and maybe there's a technical term, but I call it like my Flintstone vitamin theory. So like I don't know if you know, but like it was either Wilma or Betty looked too similar in vitamin form, like with their outline, that they could only include one because they're, in the original run of Flintstone vitamins.
Oh, that's funny.
They had Dino, they had Fred and Barney, but they could only have one between Wilma and Betty because they were so similar of archetype of body types. But same goes with archetypes. Same goes with the looks of all these characters. You can't have the same one twice, right? They all fit a certain mold.
Yeah, one of the things they really teach you, the first like in like art school or any kind of design courses, is silhouettes, the importance of the differentiation of silhouettes in the character designs.
Mm-hmm.
So which is interesting because when you get into properties based off of toys, a lot of times you're going off of similar molds.
Right.
So the characters are all very similar. And like I I that's why you really got to understand the brand and what makes things different. And like I actually really got into a flow designing a lot of these new characters to make them feel like they come from that era and they could have been these toys, but so, that's one of the biggest conversations I have with Pop when he's drawing stuff is like I'll have some weird little nerdy nuances to it that I've shown a number of like old school 80s toy and GI Joe fans, and they're like, oh my god, these are hitting just right. And like I'm like, I got to make sure I keep that stuff in there. um and but yeah, it's yeah, you're totally right about the character designs and stuff.
Yeah. Now, we've kind of touched on everything, and you've mentioned Pop Mon, who is the illustrator, correct, on the Disavowed.
Yeah. It's the yeah, he's my partner in the whole thing. I'm basically building this world and I'm designing these characters and handing them to him, and he's doing all of the art and filling in all the gaps of all the stuff that where I'm like, oh, I put on my writer hat and it's like, okay, well, we didn't really design this, but like I'll do something like like our main villain is Lord Anon. He runs Komodo, and I like sketch out his chamber and what I'm trying to envision, because it's easier for me to just sketch it out than it is to try to explain it.
Yeah.
But he's no, he's great, man, and I think besides his well, and like I'm really impressed with his ability to like to just draw like some of these like vehicles, just they look like they to draw these big lumbering things that have this energy,
Yeah.
like when the Jeep's busting through this door, knocking it down, or this giant tanks busting through the side of a mountain. It just yeah, he draws it like than some of the and as good as anybody we have ever worked with, if not better. So
Yeah.
really excited about that.
Well, I mean, first things first, I don't know whether I've said this on this live stream, is that like I read, and I can't talk completely about the first issue of the Disavowed, but I loved it. So I read the Ash Can
Thanks, man.
first. It was a great read. Again, I went in thinking it was gonna be more like that little PSA thing, because that was the first thing I read when I was at Comic-Con, and I went into it and I was like, oh, it's a good story. And I
Thank
don't
you.
want to. I don't
Thanks.
want to spoil anything, and I can't spoil anything. But it was very. I don't want to say surprising because it wasn't like I was doubting it, but that there were a lot of surprises in the story that kept me hooked. And now the problem with reading things beforehand and getting like an early sneak peek on my end is that I have to wait extra long for issue number two.
Now you have to wait like a million years for issue 2, and you get to see everyone's comments where you're like, no, it's different than that.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's I kind of feel like almost we have an unfair advantage when it comes to that because imagine if, you know, no one had ever done a deconstruction of the Justice League before, or
yeah,
they never did a parody of like anything like that. And you're the first person to take these archetypes and switch things around and you know, whereas now, it's been done so much in the superhero realm. Um, so yeah, it it's one thing like anybody can take characters from certain archetypes or a certain brand or whatever and take the characters from a kid's property or even like just a PG-13 property and you can put them into a more extreme rated R world
mm-hmm.
where they can do all these crazy things, um, and get away with it like the violence and sex and all that. I mean, maybe you could have, you know, I don't know, Flint like snorting coke and running into battle, like, and
Yeah,
it's still even maybe you could even get away with that, but there's certain things that to make it its own thing, it has to characters that do things that would never really happen in the real story, even if in that setting. So like, yeah, that would totally betray the root essence of that character, because it's not those characters. They're
mm-hmm.
not just hollow paper cutouts of those, something else. And that's when the disavowed is really about what I can reveal, and it's a little spoilery, but it's kind of necessary. Is it's former members of both teams, the United Five and Komodo, who to this day are working together on a common mission. And why did that happen? How did that come about? And that's why they're the disavowed. Um, and what is the United Five now? If it still exists. And how the hell are these old guys still around? What's that all about? Which gets into the themes of nostalgia, how these brands like refuse to die. We also get to play along themes that kind of just organically work in there about people in power, not just in politics, but in the corporate world and world at large, not seceding their power to younger generations. So all kinds of fun things to chew on for story fodder there.
I
That's what this is really all about.
this is all news to me, and now you're making it extra hard for me to have to look forward to issue number two. Okay, so thanks so much for that. Maybe I can get a sneak peek on issue two and three. When you get the chance, because it's gonna be that much tougher for me to get to wait that long. Would you say that? Okay, I need to get it out of the way. What would you say? Is this a parody? Is it a satire? Is it an homage? Is it a meta commentary? A deconstruction? Any of these words fit
I
for the
think all of it.
disavowed?
It's I guess at its core, and for it to actually truly last and be around for years, it has to be a deconstruction and its own original thing. Which will happen more as we get into the present day stuff. But I guess it's a satire. When it is a satire, it's a satire, and it's obvious that there's a satire
Mm-hmm.
effect happening. Um, you know, um, I also don't want to be afraid, just completely skewer something, So, there's I'm not gonna hide from this isn't something to like tear down something I love. I guess the difference would be somebody had a great quote about like Tim Seeley's Local Man is like if someone did like a Watchmen or The Boys, but it was written by someone who liked superheroes. Like I
Yeah.
love that stuff. So I'm not, but I'm also not going to shy away from problems with like the military industrial complex in the story or characters that think they're good but they're crazy like sociopaths. Like that's just cool story shit,
Yeah.
Um and then it's I mean, some of it was definitely inspired by like I was just thinking about this earlier, like thought exercises a couple years ago when I was like, I always had a clear vision if we brought back the specific Devil's Due continuity of the GI Joe stuff, what would I do? And what would the audience care about? Like, what would actually move 50,000 copies? Like, it would have to be marketed a certain way, all that. And that's different than if you'd relaunched it from scratch. So, and when I relaunched it, I handpicked the characters, I updated the designs myself, I did all that, and I made it for 2001 because it was 2001.
Mm.
Like and it wouldn't be the same as now. And also I was updating characters that were less like just barely gone for 10 years, not even. And that's different than if I was trying to like take Joe from 1975 and make him cool for 2001.
Right.
It just doesn't, even they didn't do that. They made the team and brought him in later. So that's kind of like when a brand goes a certain amount of time and it hasn't on a mainstream level been successfully relaunched with like a huge hit movie or video game, or it's just not in the public consciousness the same way. You kind of have too much of a gap after a certain point. And that's
Yeah.
what, when I was thinking about all this stuff, and this is before I knew like a comic book mega, mega like mega god of comics like a Robert Kirkman's going to come in with the clout to really do what he wants to do, and let Skybound do really really great. Sorry, I have a gnat flying around. I just caught myself on camera going like they're
Josh Blaylock goes wild on interview.
I just start going, oh.
Has a breakdown.
He talks with his hands a lot more than we thought. But the hands don't really fit the words. Yeah, like this was just thinking like, if I had to bring this back from scratch now for an audience that really, it still has never really broken out of like the 80s-ness of it, and everything that's successful is just relaunches of 80s things to this day, then what would I do? And that's what inspired me to say, what people are still enamored with is 80s nostalgia in general. Like, I mean, you got like Stranger Things and other shows like that that are, still, I think something about the era captures people because it's like as modern as will ever be with everything still being analog. It's almost like this weird romanticization of that. But I don't know, who knows? Anyway, I was like, why are we trying to modernize it? Just own it.
Yeah.
Go even go back to the 80s, make it even more 80s and more extreme than in that aspect. And like, that way, now if the character doesn't really fit the modern era, it's kind of problematic. You're just like, well, yeah, but that's like talking to your grandpa, man. That's what he did. and then you can have fun with that in the present day.
For people.
Oh, by the way, there were also laser guns, and for some reason there's not now, and that's part of we have to figure out why.
There's so many things. Okay, so first of all, is that people out there may not recognize that you wrote the actual GI Joe comic for so long, right? How many years did you write it for?
I wrote it for 2. So in 2000, I got the rights from Hasbro.
Yeah.
So I kind of oversaw the whole thing, and then and then I worked with artist Steve Kurth on the actual interiors of the book. I set up the deal with Image Comics after I got in the license, and then we released it. It was a huge hit. It was definitely like GI Joe was back, and it was the first 80s cartoon like property to come back like that.
Yeah.
So it kickstarted out a whole 80s wave, which I'd be the last person to think it was be going on 20 years later. But yeah, no, that blew up. I wrote the book for 2 years, and then I handed it off to a great writer, Brandon Jerwa, who understood that property better than anyone. And then he also expanded upon some characters that I created. Like he did Master and Apprentice with Snake Eyes, created Snake Eyes as Apprentice Kamakura, which I actually took as it was a random child character at the end of the last issue of the GI Joe's that Larry Hama wrote. He did that. And then I would come back in from time to time, or I would oversee it. Like I created a daughter for Zartan named Zanya, and then Sean McKeever was a writer who came in and wrote her, helped develop her origin story. So I'd kind of be in here and there, and then I'd come back. I wrote the Dreadnoks Declassified, which was the whole origin of Zartan, and how he came to run the Dreadnoks. Did the GI Joe versus Transformers crossover was my second biggest thing. Actually, that was the equal, if not. Sorry, that's back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sold yeah, we those were both like 100,000 copy sellers instantly for each one, which was crazy
Was
with
that the
barely any
first time they
variant
crossed
covers.
over?
Not since the Marvel run, yeah. There
Mm.
was an 80s Marvel crossover, which I went into homage slightly, and my whole thing was let's make this a fun. I want to homage the Marvel thing, and this should feel like a summer movie. Um, and the concept I had was the Kubrick finds the Transformers on the Ark before they wake up. That's it. So when the world meets Cobra, they already have Transformer power. They've got a Cobra Commander, like they're shooting lasers. Uh, Optimus Prime's like a giant hiss tank under Cobra control.
Hmm.
Starscream's a Cobra Rattler, all this stuff. And but Dreamwave had the license, so I had to call Dreamwave and say, "Hey, I want to do this. What if we call Hasbro together? Say, hey, we're both cool with this. Can you let us do GI Joe versus Transformers? Let them do Transformers versus GI Joe, their own version, and we just do a little license for like, you know, well, a one-off."
Yeah.
And then Dreamwave did the World War II thing, so couldn't be any more different than ours. They did Jay Lee come in, did a really dark, cool World War II alternate reality thing.
Okay.
And then unfortunately they went bankrupt, and I think IDW may have finished that series off. I can't remember,
Mm.
but uh, we ended up doing four Joe versus Transformers miniseries. Tim Seeley and Mike Norton worked on the next one, and then uh, Tim ended up writing one that Udon Studios did that had
Mm.
more of like a animation style vibe, and then Tim wrote the last one, and Andrew Wildman, the classic Transformers artist, drew it. Where Cobra Law turned out they worship Unicron, and
Okay.
kind of wrapped up the whole thing.
Yeah. I love the lengths that crossovers go through to like make things meet up. Like Ghostbusters and
Yeah,
Ninja Turtles, I think teamed up, and like Ninja Tur. I mean, Ninja Turtles have been teaming up with everybody, but Ninja Turtles and Batman, Ninja Turtles and Stranger Things, Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers. All these crossovers that like it exists for the moment of time that that story is being told, right?
yeah. That's my as like, I think as a writer, that's one of my favorite things. I think I do feel like that's one of my strong suits is solving those kind of problems. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Like honestly, the Zartan origin story was like that because the toy said one thing, the comic book said a couple other contradictory things, and the cartoon said another thing. And I loved finding a way to make them all make sense and fit. Um, and so when you do those crossovers like that, that's the fun in all of it. But one of my dream crossovers to write to this day, I've had this idea for like 20 years, 15 years at least, is Batman versus Snake Eyes. And not the random like marketing one they did with Fortnite. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had this idea forever, how, you know, Snake Eyes just shows up in Gotham for some reason, and Batman sees them, and like I might just have to write that someday as fanfic just to get out of my system, because
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll ever happen. But yeah, man, that's I mean, somewhere there's actually like a 400-page omnibus of all of those Transformers crossovers put together into a hardcover.
I mean, with my research going over everything, there's just a lot out there. It feels like you've been really integral to GI Joes for so long, and um, the fact that now you're on this Disavowed, I want to pivot back to Disavowed and talk about some of these characters that are here because, um, again, not spoiling anything. The ash can was out, so I'm just sharing some images from the ash can. But there are some like cool characters and some cool names and code names, which is part of my love of GI Joe. Is the idea that like there's a code name, there's a character with a backstory, there's like a toy involved, and they have like a weapon of choice, maybe a very unique ability to make omelets. I don't know. Like there's one guy who makes really
Yeah.
good omelets, and he. His name's like
His name's
Egghead
Over Easy.
or Over Easy. Okay,
Yeah,
see, you
yeah.
stick to that. You
No,
do
I
what you
loved
do.
that. That was part of the real fun because I also had to make up a bunch of modern names too.
Yeah.
Because as I was thinking of the old names, I kept coming up with stuff. I was like, oh wait, that wouldn't have made sense in like 1987.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've got some fun ones too. Little spoiler, but like we've got deep fake and biohack and the
Uh-huh.
stoic and all all these different things that sound more current.
Are they
Um,
are they current code names versus because there's a lot of jumping around in time. I'll say that.
yeah, you haven't met no, you don't meet any modern. There's very little modern stuff in the very present day in the first issue.
Yeah.
It does jump around in time, but we're not really here yet.
Yeah. So you're dealing with a lot of old fashioned code names, right?
Yeah, so like it's funny, and I got too nerdy, like I this is the stuff where I obsess over as a
Yeah.
writer for like hours that no one's ever going to care about. But I'm like, so there's a guy who is a computer dude, his name's Dial Up.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, could you have had the name Dial Up in 1989? Would it have made any sense? I'm like, well, when would the military have the internet and blah blah blah, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? When I was a kid, my stepdad was in the Air Force. He had a phone at home and he would dial it and it would call the internet in like 1986 or something, and he
Yeah.
would somehow access the computer at work. So I was like, okay, very good. But
I was thinking about
yeah,
dial up. I was thinking to myself, I was like, because I'm a kid of the '90s, so when it comes to Transformers, I dealt more with Beast Wars. Beast Wars was my first Transformers thing. GI Joe when it was rebooted, and later
yeah,
'90s concepts. But I was thinking about dial up because I had dial up when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, but kind of the thing about this is, yes, it's when the military had it, but also if you're living in this world of like they have futuristic technology, which
yeah.
is only like five
Oh,
to
that's
ten
your
years
out.
from
That's your
then.
easy. That's your easy. So that's how the normal sane person would do it. It'd be like,
Yeah,
whatever. It's like future shit.
yeah,
But no, me,
future, right? Quote
I'm
unquote.
looking up like, okay, no, the way you send it a private cable message in this year was like it was an auto din file that you could have had in like 1987 or
Yeah.
whatever. And so that's how they would have done it. And they would have, like, I'm thinking about that crap.
Did you have to do a
And
lot
then
of research?
uh, yeah, I still want to make sure, if I'm mentioning ranks, vehicles, like certain, if the technology is supposed to be grounded and real, I want that to be accurate so that the crazy stuff makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as like, how the sci-fi stuff works, I don't worry about it that much, but yeah, that's kind of a common thread in that's something in all my stuff, like with the encoded, it's a story I do, takes place in 2055. That's just like me being a huge nerd for like how all these technologies might converge in about 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Mercy Sparks. Whenever I use an angel or a demon name, that's a story about a devil girl that works for heaven hunting rogue angels.
As one
If I
does.
use as I use, yeah, she does heaven's dirty work.
Yeah.
But like, I never, very rarely will I actually make up an angel or a demon name. If it's supposed to actually be an angel or a demon, I'll look up like what I kind of want the character to do. Is there anything in mythology that does the same purpose, and
Mm-hmm.
use that? So I'm I'm a geek for all that stuff.
I mean I love it. That it kind of it's par for the course, right? If you're if you're writing X-Men comics, you have decades of mutants and past characters you can draw from. You don't necessarily have to create new mutants. You can kind of, if you're like, oh, you want a guy who controls fire, here's 20 that you could choose from.
Yeah, and that I mean that's the key. That was always the challenge of having hiring anyone to write GI Joe, is because back then we were closer to and we were following the Marvel continuity, and you had to have someone that understood it all.
Yeah.
And it was a lot easier to find someone that understood all the Marvel continuity than it was specifically people who understood the GI Joe continuity. Like they understood Marvel superhero, DC superhero stuff.
Yeah.
That's just what the pool of talent really knew.
Right.
And then now, all these years later, it's like more separation, and they're kind of more of a reboot. But it's funny when you hear Larry Hama talk about this stuff, though, who created a lot of all of this from,
Yeah.
he's like, I don't care about continuity. He's like, I write page to page, whatever. He's like and it might have been him that said something like, it might have been him that said this. but like people remember moments, not plots, or not, something like that. Where
Yeah.
it's like you remember the way a character had a one line that they said something back to a character, or you remember, you know, uh just little things like that,
Yeah.
that stick with you forever. They become mimetic. That you're repeating lines to your friends and stuff like that. All the other stuff sort of like kind of washes away after a certain point.
Yeah. I feel like there's two types of people. There are there's okay,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm a huge continuity whore. I am I am too into continuity that I need things to like make sense. And like you'll see me on the board with the string and like, this has to.
yeah.
Especially when it like I grew up with X-Men, obviously a lot of people did. But like the X-Men movies wouldn't even keep the same continuity from movie to movie. There would be so many things that just wouldn't make sense. And you'd have like teenage me being like, no, 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 no. Hank McCoy, sure, is in the first 3 X-Men movies, but he's only blue in the 3rd one. Let's figure out how the strings work.
Yeah.
It was a wild
That's
time to be an
that's
X-Men
who
fan.
writes the no prize to Marvel, to Stan Lee.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, good job figuring that one out. Here you go. No, I'm the same way though, because I really am though. Like I I can't stand, like, there were like in the early 2000s, it's when like the real episodic TV shows began, like Lost and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when you find out they really had no idea what they were doing the whole time. They would introduce some crazy thing and really they had no idea, or whoever did have the idea maybe changed jobs and now there's different writers. And I was like, that stuff, like Battlestar Galactica, like broke my heart.
Yeah.
It was it should have ended at the end of one season and it never continued, just been the bleak ending, but they carried it on and like that. So I was like, no, I always want to know, at least in my head, how the story's going to end or what the rules of the world are, and then let the characters play in there. So I'm trying to be a little less, anal about that stuff. But
Yeah.
for
Well,
people
yeah,
like
don't
you,
go
hopefully you
crazy.
appreciate them.
You know, you gotta have like a somebody like you have to like throw out the big punches and the other person's like cleaning up, around you. Like I get
Yeah,
that. Do you
yeah.
feel though that you're, because you grew up being a fan of all these things, that you are a fan of things currently, that drives how you view yourself on the other side as a creator? Like, what do the fans
Um,
want to see?
it's
How do the
probably more
fans
like,
think?
I don't know. Maybe it's more like they shape the way I think. I don't
Mm,
know. Like, or it's always weird because everyone, it's like how, I guess, everyone, like some people write where they just write like linearly,
yeah,
and I'm like, that just fries my brain. I can't imagine it. I have to think about things like a sketch. Maybe that's because I'm really originally I'm more of a storyteller who writes, who I'm a storyteller who draws,
yeah,
you know. Like I'm thinking visually in my head what how I would draw it as I'm writing it. Sometimes I will just go draw because it's easier and then go back. But the I'll sketch it out. But the I kind of have to write things like a pick like a sketch, like it's just all rough, and then I'll eventually at some point go down and write pages 1 to 20 or one whatever how many pages it is. So it's almost like a sketch that gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and then you got to ink it, and like that's the final writing stage, and then now it's crispy, ready
yeah,
to go. And that's but and if I'm writing something that uh is not in the real world, and that also I do the same thing with the world building. Um, which is funny because I started working with a lot of companies that, like, for clients outside of comics and stuff who are developing new properties, whatever. They get obsessed with lore and they don't ever get to the story. And I'm like
yeah,
constantly pushing them, like, fuck all this stuff. You got to tell the story, man. Don't worry about it. And then they think that I'm this guy who's like doesn't care about that. And I'm like, you guys don't know. I'm obsessive about this stuff.
yeah,
And I write stuff for my own little bios that no one will ever know or see about the world and characters or why certain things happen. But to me, that helps create like a balance where it helps you solve plots later. It helps you, gives you like rules and a structure to live by,
Mhm.
that lets you be more free in a way instead of getting yourself into a trap. Um, so yeah, it's I think maybe part of it came though from playing with all those all those toys from all those different, shows and comics and everything, and telling stories with them, because you're
Yeah,
a kid, you're sitting there acting out stories, and
I know
creating
I
worlds.
was. Action
Especially,
figures,
if you bring in,
Legos, like
oh yeah,
yeah,
totally.
yeah. Um, sorry, did I cut you off right there?
No, no, not at all.
Um, we have a question from one of the fans of the Keeg that left a question on our Instagram story. uh, Kiki Kelsey says, "What are some lesser known art tips? I guess writing or art that you can share that no one told you that you had to learn on your own."
Oh wow. Well, art for comics, probably like I mean, well, it's hard to think of anything that no one told me, man, because
Yeah,
usually it's more like everyone tells you over and over again, and
and you
you're
don't
like, you just
listen.
don't listen. Yeah, yeah. It's just that I guess it'd be you eventually get to a stage where they well, no one told me this, but I kind of intuitively did it. When you go ask for tips on your art, go in there literally saying like, "Hey, I wanted to know if you could look at this to give me some pointers," because that immediately takes all of the defensiveness away from the person who's going to look at it. Because you might not know how many people come to them all the time throwing like really amateur stuff at them, like they're hot shit. Like,
Yeah,
look at this, and you're like, man, this is how I drew when I was 14. Like, I don't. You're 35 years old. Like, whereas if a 50-year-old guy came and was amateur but said, hey, just want some help, it's just a whole different attitude. You're gonna get a lot better advice. And I think the thing to take away from it is don't also don't listen to everybody. If you hear the same thing from 5 different people, that's probably the advice to follow,
okay.
because then you're seeing a consistent pattern where they're pointing out your what you need to work on.
Hmm.
So other than that, most people need to just slow down, just spend more time on the art, and go look at original art from artists you admire, and you'll and like really look at it and see. Usually the secret when you're like, why can't mine look like that, is because you they spent like 10 more hours on that page than you are. And
Yeah,
that's a big part of it too.
yeah. Um, question when it comes to these characters in this book. Who would you say the main character is?
Um, right, for the first issue, a couple issues, even though this is definitely an ensemble cast,
Mm-hmm.
uh the person who takes you into the world, who became the he kind of took over the story and became the protagonist organically, is Matthew Hauser, the son of one of the main characters of the United Five,
Mm-hmm.
who finds finds evidence of his father's involvement in this team, and it becomes a life obsession for him. And he's growing up in the 90s, and the internet is a bad place to keep secrets, and there's all kinds of rabbit holes. It'd be like if this team existed and they kind of deny it. They also deny that this cult was as big as it was and that it was involved in things it was, but he's on message boards finding stuff out, and that becomes like the everyman character that gives you, the reader, the access into this larger world. But I'm not like I'm kind of letting that go. Where the story takes me, he's not necessarily going to be like the main guy every issue or every time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he's not even around because we're in the past.
Yeah.
But he's an
I
integral character.
I told you that I wasn't going to do gotcha questions, so I'm not trying to do gotcha questions and try to trip you up on what spoilers are and what's not. But on the cover of the Disavowed, you can see a character holding a squirrel. What are their names again? Because I mean, I read this,
Oh
but
yeah,
what's
that
the name of the
is
blue suit? What's the name of the squirrel, and why?
that's Blue Sky and Stormy, and we'll forgive you once because Stormy's sensitive, but he's a sugar glider. And
Oh,
he
not
is
oh,
always
that
he's
makes way
always
more sense.
mistaken for a
Okay.
fly. He's always mistaken for a flying squirrel, and he's sensitive about it.
Is it
No, but
really? Is he really?
no, yeah, no, he has a sugar glider. Yeah,
Okay.
so Blue Sky is like this dude who's like the jetpack guy.
Yeah.
Like he's just got this jetpack, and he's also you don't see it in there, but I also envision he's got like one of those squirrel suits that guys wear when they're jumping off the mountains.
Yeah.
But yeah, his you have to have a pet that has no business in being in combat to be like a satire of this stuff. So
Yeah.
that one element's definitely like a fun little satire. But yeah, I know Stormy's there in battle with him, little sugar glider, just hanging out with him, and also pretty fierce.
I have faith in you because we mentioned this earlier about like, you know, somebody writing a superhero deconstruction that hates superheroes versus someone like you who loves the source material. I would like to believe that Stormy lives. And
Time
I
will tell.
I would hope that you aren't so twisted and hate these characters that you've created that you're willing to let Stormy die. Stormy of all people. Other people can
I
die.
will say, you know what? I will say it's probably going to be twisted in a way you're not expecting.
Oh no, I don't know what that means. Okay. All right. Um Somebody pointed out online that there are two guys that look kind of like Snake Eyes because you have Blue Sky and then you have this other character in the front with the sword, Mantis, correct?
Yeah, that's the Mantis. And it's funny because I never even it was Blue Sky was just there are other characters that may be get the similar comments,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, actually in G.I. Joe and other even in Mask, things like there's characters that the most popular G.I. Joe characters were all dudes with like ninja masks and stuff. So it's just I think it's gonna and then you have a lot of guys that just cover their faces with helmets and gear. So it's sort of like but I also, that's opportunity to kind of have fun with some of that too. Um, because there were so many versions of Snake Eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's now Blue Sky is just a straight up military dude.
Okay.
The Mantis may or may not have some ninja abilities.
Mm. I mean, you carry around a sword. You just assume people have ninja abilities. Is that not a given?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I don't think you're allowed. Like that's how you get it past the military
Yeah.
issue.
I brought my own
So
katana. You know.
The United Five is a quasi government. They're a quasi corporate entity that is funded by the government, so they don't have to answer Freedom of Information Act requests.
I there's I remember you writing that in the comic, and I was like, okay, I like where this is going.
That's actually what the military
Focusing,
industrial complex does these days,
yeah,
especially. They that's how they avoid having to reveal stuff to us.
I the this is all research that you did for this, or is this all research you had and then you were like, I have to
Um,
write something around this?
that stuff's a lot of stuff I just already knew because
Yeah,
yeah, probably partially from researching and writing Joe stuff in the day of just keeping tabs on that and
yeah,
like yeah, just how we just fund the military like every year with so much money. That's up to about $1 trillion now.
yeah.
And like some of that stuff, I don't want to like make it boring by just going into all that with all every issue. And honestly, that's one thing. The Boys is that is at its heart. It is military industrial complex
Mm-hmm.
commentary.
Yeah,
So I'm getting into some other stuff that I don't want to reveal. That will be people will see where I'm going with it.
yeah.
It'll be
I
fun.
so I'm gonna I won't rant about this, but I've ranted this on other shows that I do. Is that I am a fan of the Boys show. I am absolutely not a fan of the Boys comic. And I think that it comes down to almost the distaste for the characters that are in the comic. And that's my personal opinion. I think that like it's very nihilistic and like I get the point on some of the stuff. But compare that to Invincible and Robert Kirkman, loving kind of the source of these characters, or even dare I say Mark Miller with Jupiter's Legacy and those type of heroes, is that like I don't see the I see the boys in this, but I don't see a distaste for the characters per se. Am I kind
Yeah,
of
no,
on
it's
the
funny.
wrong?
I literally just used that example. Well,
Yeah.
someone I was talking to someone about, like, I think it's somewhere in between The Boys and like Invincible, and where
Okay.
it's not afraid to go to the boys level.
Yeah.
Whereas like there's certain things in Invincible like you're just never gonna see superheroes do it, but as far as violence and stuff, it's yeah, all day long.
Yeah.
But and no, that's a good example. And like yeah, Mark Millar did I guess yeah, with Kick-Ass it's more about, it's not really tearing down superheroes, but it wasn't really as much of a celebration either.
Mm.
But then you had like Jupiter's Legacy is a little better example. Yeah. I in some cases I may tear things down just for the fact to really hit home, like, oh no, this is not the same. This is something different.
Yeah.
And I think you know, by the if you picked up the third issue, um,
I'd love to.
especially into the fourth issue,
Yeah.
you know, it's gonna be like, okay, now almost like this is what the book really is, but it
Mm.
needed all this setup and everything to get to it.
Yeah. It's a
But
great setup.
what's great is that we're never going to stop going back though. So we can do spin-offs and other characters, and we can go into, you know, flashbacks and deep dives, because the blessing and the curse of an ensemble cast of any team book is you have so many characters to explore, and you really have to narrow it down to like whose story it really is. The benefit of doing any kind of deconstruction or parody is that you can throw in characters without explaining their backgrounds, and people already have an idea who they are.
Right. Because
You
they're
know, you
archetypes, right?
see, yeah, you see the Wonder Woman or the Aquaman guy, and you're like, I get it. You
Yeah.
don't have to explain all this stuff. Whereas there had never been an Aquaman before. You're like, what the hell's this guy? Look, you know.
What?
So
Somebody
yeah,
from
yeah,
underwater? What's going on
yeah.
here?
So
Yeah.
so that and that's where it becomes important to be accessible to the newer reader by having a vibe, um, because they don't necessarily know who certain references are,
Yeah.
you know, but most people reading it are going to.
Yeah. One question that I do want to ask you before we run out of time is the main bad guys in this are Komodo. What's the difference between Komodo and Cobra?
Uh, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no similarities. Now, so Komodo, the idea of
Sorry,
the
completely
Komodo is
different animal. I'm sorry. No
it and
similarities
one
whatsoever.
the easy way is to think about it as kind of like, what if you took a very current, popular, very powerful cult-like religion that exists today, has a lot of monetary influence and
Mm.
a lot of people in entertainment. Uh, it rhymes with Shmai and Shmology,
Mm-hmm.
and merge that with like a Cobra.
Yeah.
So the that's kind of one fun way to look at it. And then you realize like, well, maybe they actually do know something because they're doing all this crazy stuff, and you know, it's seems to be working. So maybe they're not total quacks. Um, but also there's a whole backstory of like, it started with this sort of humble beginning of a new agey West Coast, Sedona, Arizona, Denver, Colorado kind of like self-help group with
Yeah.
esoteric leanings, but also had like a MLM kind of vibe to it. And they were, but they by the 70s they just became, in the 70s they become this cult. In the 80s they're getting involved in military stuff, and all of a sudden like the leader, Lord Anon, claims that he's channeling messages from some other, you know, intergalactic race.
Mm-hmm.
And when you there's actually, you know, this is the thing, like these a lot of these, there's plenty of instances, like just go down that YouTube rabbit hole, people who like say they're channeling the Pleiadians and they're speaking through them and talking and all this stuff. Like, but what if like one of these people starts actually doing things like breaking, like breakthrough research in physics and science, and is hoarding it for themselves and selling it. And you're like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And a lot of the members actually have sort of a religious devotion. So that's like one of the things with any group like Cobra or Hydra or whatever. It's like there's the loyalty aspect but especially with Cobra, I mean, most of them were like beyond the soldiers. They're just little tiny fiefdoms all fighting with each other. And yeah, the little element of like, yeah, but there's something to either they know that this guy's the only one that understands how to access this stuff, or they truly are devoted on a religious level, even if they don't like them. That's something else to play into. And then it's also my outlet because me and my wife watch a lot of cult documentaries.
There you go. Um, or life imitating art, imitating life, imitating art. I think that's it's folded over on itself. Uh, I'm not gonna spoil anything, and I keep saying that I'm not gonna spoil anything. That's me. That's my mantra for this. There's so much more than what the ash can of Disavowed had. I read the whole first issue. That last part, super crazy. I'm not gonna talk about it, but it's super crazy, and I can't wait for issue number 2. It's hurting me. So if you
All right,
if you know someone who knows
the best
someone
review.
who can get me issue number 2, let me know.
That's a good review. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, you can quote me on all that. Um, Before we get going, what how is issue 1? What's going on with issue 1? How can people support the project? All that good stuff. Where can people find this?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
So you can find me at like Instagram on Blaylock Comics. You can go to devilsdustudios.com. I'll be posting stuff there. I made there's a Facebook group, actually, like a fan group. It's the Disavowed comic fan group. We're posting stuff there for like that's for like a lot of the OGs that are really engaged with us. But as far as being ready for when this thing launches, there's a backer kit page to follow that Massive has set up. It's getting close to 400 people now, I think. That's where you'll be able to follow that and be notified for the launch. Be able to access previews and stuff. We're probably gonna be moving that over to Kickstarter, but we'll still be using backer kit.
Yeah.
So just stay tuned, follow the Massive social media links, and we'll be launching soon. This is definitely going to be a major push in the stores. This isn't just going to be crowdfunding. And I mean, it's going to launch and start as a 5-issue miniseries, but I mean, you've seen from everything we've talked about, I mean, this thing can go on for a long time, and there's plenty of stories to tell. So I really want to do this for years.
Yeah. I'm waiting for you to write me in as Over Easy, the guy who makes the omelets for
we don't have a cook. We don't have a cook yet.
Do you not have a cook?
No, I don't think we do. I'm trying to think that I write.
Isn't there?
I don't know.
Isn't there a guy named Chef?
Yeah, but yeah, he's more.
Oh, but he's not a cook.
He just likes to carry. He likes to carry around kitchen knives in battle, and he might be a little bit of a psychopath. So.
Oh, okay. I just assumed he knew how to cook. So I mean, if you have a job opening,
his catchphrase is "Now we're cooking," and he's like BFFs with the Wall, who is this really other big buff dude who doesn't like to wear sleeves or have his shirt closed, and he's got a 1776 tattoo on his chest and a Ronald Reagan tattoo, and yeah, it's people have been calling him Gung Hogan as a joke for the Joe fans there.
There's so many layers to this book. I'm really excited to see what comes out of it with the miniseries, with the the issues to come. So I do tell everybody, support the Disavowed, support Josh Blaylock. Join the Facebook group if you're on Facebook, Devils Do Comics, and all that. Before we get going, though, is there anything else that you wanted to plug? I didn't even get to touch on Mercy Sparx, which I thought looked really cool, and I haven't gotten a chance to check it out. But the premise alone sounds amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, no, Mercy's my longest running indie series that I've done. It's been around for 15 years. There's 2 big hardcover omnibus that collect the story of, like I mentioned before, she's a devil girl that works for Heaven hunting rogue angels. She's sort of like assigned to do their dirty work here on Earth. And it's got a lot of humor and action, but it starts out kind of tongue in cheek and develops into this big epic story. There was a new issue that just came out. That's the only thing that's not collected in those new issues, and those hardcovers or softcover omnibus, called No More Angels Left to Fall, which she's been gone for 5 years. Something brings her back. And there's a spinoff coming out called Club Nephilim. Issue 0 is at the printer right now, written by Pat Shand, who like I co-wrote with, and I've written every Mercy Sparx thing except for like 2 issues that Pat worked with me on. And we're going to he's taking the reins on this one. So yeah, there's that. I work on another sci-fi book called Circuit Seduction Revenge, which is about a synth brothel sex bot that gets hacked to go on a killing spree inside the facility. Kind of like John Wick meets Ex Machina.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, and then yeah, I do like my jam is I love supernatural and sci-fi. But it's been really fun, and I can't help but bring some of that stuff into the Disavowed, which you'll see. But really, it's been fun to go back and do something like different from that again.
Yeah.
So yeah, check it out. I guess my
that's it. I like.
Yeah, I didn't have a good close there. Like I'm like,
you gotta have a
maybe check it out if you want.
You gotta have a catchphrase, just like your characters in the Disavowed. You know, you gotta have a catchphrase. You gotta figure out what's
Excelsior.
Yeah. That might be taken. Well, is it still taken? I don't know. Anyway, sadly, but what was I like how you have your eggs in different baskets, all in that, you know, all your different series with different genres and sci-fi and supernatural and stuff. So kudos to you, you know.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. For everybody out there, once again, this is writer-artist Josh Blaylock. Support him on Blaylock Comics on Instagram, Devil's Due Comics. Pretty much that, I mean, they just search Devil's Due Comics or search your name and they can find you on all, you know, all their social media.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. And definitely stay tuned for the Kickstarter and the back. What was it? What was the one that it's on right now? Backer
Kit.
Backer Kit.
It's like it's a everyone does Kickstarters usually seen that, like where it's like how we do all our fulfillment and a lot of like promotion too.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And there's if you go to devilsduestudios.com, there's an email pop up right away too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Josh, so much for your time. Thank you to everybody out there for watching and or listening. If you were watching us live, you were watching us on twitch.tv/The Keeg Show or youtube.com/The Keeg Show, or maybe you're listening to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, all the good stuff. We're all out there, all the different Keeg shows. This is the Keeg Chats, where we talk to awesome people like Josh, doing awesome things like the Disavowed. But you can find us on social media anywhere at The Keeg Show, or /The Keeg Show, pretty much everywhere and anywhere. Support your local comic shops. Go to comicshoplocator.com. Support your local comic shops and support your local public libraries. That's pretty much it. Thank you once again, Josh, so much for coming.
Right on, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, and once again, I am your host, Dimithri Perera, and this has been the Keeg Chats with Josh Blaylock. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Super strong or super fast. Gotta beat the boss and get the loot. Cause it's the king, and we got geek news.